You think you know who shaped you. You have a face in your mind right now. Maybe your mother, maybe your father, maybe a teacher who broke something in you that never fully healed. You have spent years, maybe your entire adult life, tracing your patterns back to them. Your fear of failure, your need for approval, the way you shrink in certain rooms, the way you explode in others. You blamed them or you forgave them. Either way, you pointed at them and said, "That is where it started." But what if you are pointing at the wrong person? What if the first hand that ever reached inside your mind and rearranged the furniture was not someone you ever met? Not someone who ever spoke your name? Not someone who even knew you existed? By the end of this video, you will never look at your own beliefs the same way again. Here is what nobody tells you about the human brain at birth. You arrive with almost nothing installed. A newborn human is the most helpless creature on Earth. A foal can walk within hours. A shark can hunt from birth. But you, the species that would eventually split the atom and compose symphonies and build cities visible from space, you arrive unable to hold your own head up, unable to regulate your own temperature, unable to survive a single hour without another human being making a decision on your behalf. Developmental psychologist Alison Gopnik at UC Berkeley has spent decades studying what she calls the lantern consciousness of infants. Her research shows that a newborn brain is not a blank slate. It is something stranger and more vulnerable than that. It is a wide open receiver, absorbing everything, filtering nothing. Every sound, every face, every emotional tone in the room is being recorded and weighted before the child has any capacity to question, reject, or understand what is being absorbed. You were being programmed before you had the hardware to know it was happening. And here is where the story takes its first dark turn. Before your parents ever spoke a word to you about who you should be. Before your father's expectations landed on your shoulders, or your mother's fears were quietly handed to you like an inheritance. Something else had already gotten there first. Culture. Not culture in the soft, abstract sense. Culture as a living system. A set of invisible rules, hierarchies, assumptions, and narratives that existed thousands of years before you were born, and will exist thousands of years after you die. A system that does not need to speak to you directly because it has already shaped every single person around you, and those people are now shaping you. Anthropologist Edward Tylor, writing in 1871, defined culture as that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. He was describing something that functions less like a collection of traditions and more like an operating system. It runs in the background. It determines what is possible to think, and you were loaded with it before you ever formed your first memory. Psychologist Lev Vygotsky understood this a century ago. His research on child development revealed something that should unsettle every person who believes they arrived at their own values independently. He showed that the mind does not develop from the inside out. It develops from the outside in. The thoughts you think are not originally yours. They are the thoughts of your culture, handed to you through language, through story, through the expressions on the faces of every adult who ever looked at you in your first 3 years of life. You did not develop a self and then encounter the world. The world poured itself into you and called it a self. Now here is where it gets personal. Think about what you believe right now, not your opinions about politics or religion. Go deeper than that. Think about what you believe about yourself. Think about what you believe you deserve. Think about what you believe is possible for a person like you. Think about what you believe happens to people who want too much, or trust too easily, or dream beyond what their surroundings said was realistic. Where did those beliefs come from? You will say, your parents. But your parents received those beliefs from their parents, and their parents received them from a culture that had been laying down those tracks for centuries before any of them were born. The fear of standing out, the suspicion of rest, The equation of suffering with virtue. The deep tribal pull toward people who look and think and live like you. These are not personal insights. They are cultural inheritances, and they were inside you before your parents had the chance to add their own layer. Researcher Geert Hofstede spent decades mapping cultural values across more than 70 countries. His findings revealed something startling. People in different cultures do not just behave differently. They think differently at a structural level. Their sense of what is true, what is fair, what is possible, what is shameful. These differ so dramatically across cultures that the same event can produce opposite emotional responses in two different people raised on opposite sides of a border. And neither person chose their response. Both responses were installed before either person was old enough to have a conversation. You are not thinking your thoughts. You are thinking your culture's thoughts in your voice. But here is the turn that changes everything. The culture that programmed you was itself programmed. Every set of cultural values you carry was shaped by a specific historical moment, by a specific power structure that needed people to believe specific things in order to function. Historian Michel Foucault spent his career documenting how the dominant ideas of any era about sanity, about sexuality, about criminality, about normality were not discovered truths. They were constructed narratives, built by institutions that needed human behavior to conform to a particular shape. The belief that you should trade your time for money and call it a life. The belief that your worth is tied to your productivity. The belief that wanting more than your station is arrogance. The belief that the right way to raise children is to make them obedient rather than free. These are not ancient truths. They are relatively recent inventions, installed by specific systems at specific moments in history for specific reasons. And they are running inside you right now as if they are the natural order of things. The first person who controlled you was not your parents. It was a system so large and so old that it never needed to introduce itself. Your parents were controlled before you were. They were handed the same software, running on the same assumptions, shaped by the same invisible architecture. When they passed their fears and their rules and their ceilings onto you, they were not acting freely. They were executing a program that had been executing for generations before them. You cannot fully blame them. They never chose their code either. Developmental psychologist Diana Baumrind spent decades studying how different parenting styles produce different psychological outcomes in children. But here is what her research points toward that rarely gets discussed. Even the most conscious, loving, intentional parent is operating within a cultural framework that constrains what they can see, what they can imagine, and therefore what they can offer. The ceiling they hit is not theirs alone. It is the ceiling of their entire world. And that ceiling was lowered before you were born. So what do you do with this? The first move is the hardest. You have to look at every belief you hold about yourself, every limitation, every should, every this is just how things are. And ask one simple question. Did I choose this? Or was it chosen for me before I had the capacity to refuse it? Most of what you will find when you ask that question will not be yours. It will be borrowed, inherited, installed. The voice that tells you to be smaller. The voice that tells you that people like you do not get those things. The voice that makes you hesitate at the exact moment you should move. That voice is ancient. That voice is not you. Psychologist Dweck at Stanford University showed that the beliefs people hold about their own capacity, whether they are fixed or capable of growth, are not innate. They are learned, which means they can be unlearned. The ceiling is not structural, it is cultural. And cultural things, unlike genetic things, can be questioned, examined, and if you are willing to do the uncomfortable work, dismantled. The person who first controlled you never knew your name, never saw your face, never imagined you would exist. They built a world and you were born into it, and it shaped you before you had words for what was happening. But you have words now. And the moment you start using them to name the invisible architecture around you, to say this belief is not mine, this fear was handed to me, this ceiling was built by someone else for someone else's reasons, that is the moment the control begins to lose its grip. You were programmed before you could speak, but you are speaking now. And if this cracked something open in you, share it with one person who is still living inside a ceiling they did not choose. Because the village rebuilds itself one honest conversation at a time. Subscribe if you want to keep pulling back the curtain on the forces running your life beneath the surface. The first person who controlled you never knew you existed, but you know they existed now. And that changes everything.